Hello. We'd like to thank you all for taking the time to join us today for our K-Motion Tiles webinar. We're really excited to show you the power of K-Motion Tiles and very specifically how they can be used in your coaching programs. We have attendees on today from all over the world. I know some of you are you're on super late at night or you got up in the early morning to join us, so we appreciate you doing that, and we really look forward to walking you through how tiles can help your programs. My name is Tony Morgan. I'm a PGA professional and head of golf at K-Motion. And at this time, I'd like to introduce my guest hosts. First, Trillium Rose. Trillium is the Director of Instruction at Woodmont Country Club, just outside of DC. Welcome, Trillium. And Trillium is a full-time teacher for over 15 years. She's experienced with all levels of players, from beginners to professionals. Trillium's got a great background. She's got a master's degree in motor learning and control. And really her area of expertise is effectiveness and how to maximize time in the learning process. So Trillium, I'm really glad to have you here today.
Thanks, this will be fun.
Next, I'd like to introduce Joe DiChiara. Joe's coming to us live from our Scottsdale office. Joe is a PGA golf professional. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, Tony.
Glad to have you here. And Joe's, once again, our Director of Golf Education. He's coached also players from beginners all the way up to professionals. A lot of his expertise is actually in the junior development area. So before Joe came to K-Motion, he ran a junior academy over in Thailand and had a lot of experience in using 3D for player development. So I think he's going to bring a wealth of experience to today's discussion. So three main topics for today that we're going to cover. What are the benefits of tiles in coaching? So we're going to talk about really, what are the benefits from all three of our perspectives on how this can help you coach better, but more importantly, how it's going to help your players learn at a deeper level. We're also going to talk about 4 tile workflows that you can use right away with players. I think that's going to really be the meat of the presentation, where you can see, all right, I've got a player that's struggling with this. How do I use tiles to help improve their ball flight in less time? And then finally, we're going to end with that live Q&A. I think that's one of the best parts of the event, where you can really come in, you can ask any one of us a question, and we'll go, make sure we really cover some things that we may have not got to in the presentation. Okay, so since this is a K-Motion Tiles webinar, we probably want to start first with what is a tile? It's maybe a new word for some of you. So the very simple thing is, for the coaches that are on here, and even if you're a fitness medical professional on this webinar or a home user, you've probably been with a coach that's used a launch monitor. And really all a tile is, it's a display of measurement. So if you think about with your launch monitor, you're working with a player, and you pull up, let's call it a tile, and you want to look at face or path or angle of attack. They hit a shot, it immediately pops up on the screen. That's basically what we're looking at, but now we're looking at it for the body, and we're looking at it for the wrist. So if you think of your launch monitor really as the results data, it's telling you what the club and the ball did. Obviously very important information. What tiles in our software now are doing are telling you what the body and the wrist did, but in the simplicity of the way you use your launch monitor. No clicking in the software anymore. Pull up the parameters you want. They hit a shot. We get the data. We provide you with the data. There's over 70 tiles in the software that you can choose from. And so the biggest thing we want to do today is not go through all 70 tiles. We want to show you some of our favorites and probably some of the things that you're going to do with a lot of your players on your driving range or in your studio. So from a benefit side, a couple things that I would say are really important for you to think about, like what are the benefits of using tiles? And I'd like to get Trillium and Joe's feedback on this one as well. I'd say number one, it allows you to baseline a player very quickly. Once you know what you're working on with a player, you can now get this information right away. So if you've got a new player in your studio or a range and they are all arms and we're just trying to get them to rotate more, well, pull up the rotation numbers, and every time they hit a shot, you can say, hey, you did it, you didn't. It's all instant. So we can really baseline a player very quickly. You can also make fact-based decisions to change ball flight. So if I've got a player and at the top of their backswing, the wrist is cupped, and I say, how did you do on that last one? I got to pull up my video, and I got to scroll at the top and look at it. Well, now we're going to have flexion extension right on the screen. We can tell you if that left wrist was flat, cupped, or bowed immediately following the shot, and we're getting a hard number on it. It's also a great way to track and show progress. So if somebody's working on something now and they're in that learning process and they're looking at me, how did I do on that one? The ball might have flown well, but did they actually accomplish what they were trying to do with their body, with their arms? you've really got a way to be able to show the student, hey, you did it, congratulations, or hey, on this next one, maybe we give them a different cue to give them a different feel. And for those of you that are on this webinar that have never used 3D, maybe you're on this webinar checking it out for the first time, I would say tiles is one of the best ways to learn 3D, because now as a coach, you can just pull up the parameters that are the most important to you and just be seeing those parameters live in a lesson. I think you're going to get very familiar with the numbers very quickly without having to see graphs on the screen or so many numbers that it's overwhelming. You can just pick the tiles that are the most important to you. So with that, I want to turn it over to Trillium. Trillium, I know you've got some ideas on, you've been using tiles for the last month since it came out. What would you say are some of the benefits for you and your players?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So actually just extending on what you said about learning 3D, I found that, most of us who are coaches, I think most of you listening are coaches to some degree, or at least you look at the swing from an objective standpoint. There's no better way to learn about what a swing does than actually, I think, having data that's this specific. There's so many arguments online about what a swing looks like from a 2D still shot, and I just think it's a waste of time, honestly. For our conversation, maybe it's helpful to make a point that, hey, everybody looks different, but if you really want to get into cause and effect, wouldn't it be great to know what those bookend numbers are? You have a student that's really extreme, and so in your head that a pelvis rotation number at an extreme number might then create other things down the road. You just become such a better coach. So I think that the tiles here make it a lot easier for us, because then we can channel. So having said that, I just want to take a minute and reiterate what has to happen when, like, from a motor learning standpoint, when you're learning. It's a pretty simple process, and I think intuitively we know this, but I'm going to spell it out. So number one, we make a plan in our head as a learner or a teacher. You have a plan that you're going to do something. Let's make an example. Let's say we're talking about pelvis and the backswing. Actually, Tony, do you want to put up some pelvis numbers? Do we have backswing? Oh, cool. So we've got those tile numbers. Okay, cool. So let's look at the top down. So we've got backswing timing, downswing timing, swing time, and tempo. So this is all just pelvis, right?
Yeah, this is overall swing, just, length of time, exactly.
Super, right? So, okay. So you've got a plan. So let's use an example here. So similar to a launch monitor, you're interested in one particular area, so you can pull up one particular area. So our plan then, let's say our plan is, whatever, you have a clicked on timing in your downswing. Okay, let's say the timing in the downswing is too slow with our student. We wanted to pick it up. So the plan is to speed it up. So in order for learning to happen, you have to have a specific plan so that after you execute it, you can evaluate whether you adhered to that plan or not. So if there are too many balls in the air, too many thoughts going on in your head, or the student doesn't really know what's supposed to happen, or even you don't even really know what's supposed to happen, how can you expect a change to have been made? Right? So I think where tiles comes in so nicely is that we can create that plan, you can execute, and then you can evaluate pretty obviously in one simple way. So this is a great way to identify feel, to really actually get someone to associate a motion with feel. And as we know, feel is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get someone to feel something different and then know whether they've made that feel. So anyway, I'm beyond excited about this feature with KVS, and I feel like it's really making a monumental upgrade in terms of how we're going to be able to use this with our students and benefit our own teaching.
Yeah, great. Appreciate that. Thanks, Trillium. And Joe, a couple things that I think you wanted to add to that as well from a benefit side. What are the biggest things you're finding in using this with players?
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. So the first and foremost is how to use the tiles to effectively coach with matchups. So matchups being how the player moves in terms of the combination of different body parts do they match well to control the ball flight, or do they not match well? So we see the better players in the world, they all swing differently, but they match things up very well to play at a high level. The higher handicaps do not do that. So that's the beautiful part about matchups, is if you understand some of them, it doesn't matter if you have a 30 handicap or a 30-time winner on tour come in your door, you can coach both of them and everybody in between effectively. So we're going to talk about one matchup today, probably one of the most popular ones, of upper body rotation and lead wrist flexion extension at impact. And then I'm also going to talk to you to piggyback off of what Trillium said in terms of feel versus real. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you could use the exact screen that you're seeing here on your computer with the avatar and live numbers on the right-hand side to identify and ingrain a feel, and then also validate it with the tiles on the left-hand side after the player hits a shot. So I'll take you through both of those here in a little bit after Tony gets us started.
Yeah, great. So let's talk about very quickly before we get into our workflows. How do tiles work? How do you set them up? How do you use them? So I want to just cover this very briefly and then get into the 4 workflows I think you're going to get the most out of. So you'll see up on the screen here, there's a button called number of tiles. So right now, for K-Motion users out there, I know we got a bunch of you on this webinar today, this is the screen you're used to seeing in measure mode, just live measure mode. So it defaults to no tiles. Then you have the ability to turn on 4, 8, or 12 tiles. So depending on how much information you want on the screen, maybe you're using 12 because there's a lot of things you're looking at and you actually want to be able to evaluate out of here, and it's just for you on your tablet. It's not really for the player. But once you get down to where you know what you're working on, 4 or 8 could be a really good option. So every time they hit a shot, it's no different than your launch monitor. Now, the key to tiles is, how do you get the right information on the screen for the player that's in front of you? So with all your players, you're working on different things. They're in different levels of the game. They're simply working on different body parts, either the body or the wrist. So there's 2 ways that you can now change tiles, and you can basically be able to customize these layouts. And we want to show you that quickly. The first one is tile templates. Tile templates is the fastest way to be able to change 4 tiles at a time. So for example, let's just say we bring up our templates. You'll probably see a lot of things here you're going to recognize. We're not going to go through all of them. But let's just say we bring up swing characteristics at the bottom. We're actually going to be covering this here in just a few minutes. And we click on postures iron. I've got a 6-iron in my hand here. What this is going to do now is it's going to bring up some simple swing characteristics like S posture, C posture. Are they losing their posture at the top with side bend? Are they losing their posture at the top with upper body bend? No numbers on the screen, super simple, right? So I can quickly update those 4 tiles, any way you want very quickly. So with that, let's turn it over to Trillium. I know, Trillium, you want to do a little something here with transition sequence.
Yeah. So I love the transition sequence, and I was one of those that used to capture all the time because I love looking at the graph. And I was always kind of henpecking K-Motion to see kind of what, I don't know. I felt like I was not using it the way they wanted me to use it. So now with this transition sequence, I can just see it all the time. So anyway, so will you put the transition sequence up? Okay, there we go. So we've got pelvis at the top, torso, arm, and hand. So, but Connor, I think you have on the wrist sensor, right? Are we using wrists later?
I do, yep.
Okay, so case in point, that the arm and hand, those sensors are going to come out as the same number, shouldn't they? If they're right next to each other, like shouldn't it be 1, 2, 3, 3?
Yeah, you'll see sometimes it's 1, 2, 3, 4. A lot of times, when it's down there, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 3. In this case, we actually saw 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think just the thing to note there for customers, if that sensor's up on the upper arm, you'll definitely see 3, 4 more often. If it's down the forearm, you'll see more 3, 3s.
Okay, Connor, I can't see where it is. Can you face us so I can see where it is? Can you face the screen so we can see where your sensors are?
Oh, yep, sure. So,
yeah, that would be 3 and 4. Yep, okay, so we're talking about, anyway, 1, 2, 3, 3 versus 3, 4. So here we go. So you just hit a shot. Did you just hit a shot?
I did, yeah.
Dang it, your transition sequence is perfect. Okay, so can you hit one where it's not perfect? Or has this been something you're typically, have you worked on this in the past?
I just got lucky, I think.
All right, let's see another one. Let's see if it's a fluke. I don't want you to try to have a bad swing, but
Don't undo everything I did with them, you know, Trillium. I mean, we worked really hard.
so we've got 1, 2, 2, 2, right? I don't know. I can think of like maybe 80% of my students that might not have perfect sequence all the time. So I just think this is such a perfect way to illustrate how tiles can work well. So, all right, so let's say that's a first capture and we'd say, all right, so I like the fact that pelvis is 1. I like the fact that torso is 2, but it looks like torso, arm, and hand are all moving together. So why don't you do a drill, Connor? Now, do you have it? So Joe, you've been working with them. So Connor, do you have a sequence drill you can do maybe with no ball?
Yep. So a drill that I like to do, call it short response. What I generally like to do is I like to take the club back about halfway, and then right when I reach halfway, I fire my hips first and just really feel like that exaggerated pelvis go first. So I'll take a practice swing and actually hit the ground as well. It should capture. So we'll do a practice swing first, and then a real shot. Okay, so that did give me the power of my pelvis first, then my torso, and then my wrist and my hand. So
Just to reiterate there, we do see that 1, 2, 3, 3 sequence like Trillium was referring to. Sometimes you might see the 1, 2, 3, 4 like we initially got, but more commonly when it's down on the wrist, you'll see that 1, 2, 3, 3. The important piece here is that Connor had the pelvis, torso, and arm 1, 2, 3, right? So those are in order.
Yeah, that's right. So here's where we can get creative as coaches, and there's probably 25 great ways to work on sequence. Among us in this webinar right now, probably come up with 100. So this is where you get to play and experiment, but you can see what's working, see what's not working, and kind of get pretty accurate and immediate feedback with your student. So not to mention that this keeps everything focused. Like I was saying, you're not going to get distracted. We're looking at the numbers. This is where we are. And it keeps the focus pretty channeled, Cool. So that's what I wanted to do. And I think that, multiply this by however many versions we have. Like this is sequence. We could switch it over to peak speeds. The peak speed numbers if we wanted to. You want to do that and just see what it looks like?
For sure. And the nice thing is when you load it, by the way, it's always going to load the data. Oops, 1 second.
So can you just actually walk through what you're doing so people can see exactly how you're changing that?
Yeah, so basically I'm going up here to templates, and I'm just basically choosing a template. So let's say we want to go back to tempo. I can update that. So basically I'm clicking on templates. We've got 1 column up right now. So we can just go down to what we're looking for, in this case, peak speed sequence. We can update it, and we basically move on from there. So it's super simple to be able to update. Was I clicking on the wrong one?
yeah, you have.
No, sorry. I kept clicking on the wrong button. I was like, why is it not loading? That was my fault. So those are his speeds from his last shot. So like just off Trillium's point here, let's say Connor got in and we just gave him a cue of, let's just do something simple. Let's say his shaft was getting a little bit steep in transition, and we thought firing the pelvis a little bit faster would maybe shallow out the club. This is stuff you can play around with. Connor, give us a swing here where you feel the lower body definitely has some more action in the downswing. And we'll just see what happens. So he's 274 before with his pelvis peak speed. Those of you that like the kinematic sequence graph, this is now coming right from that data.
Yeah.
And he goes to 437, right? So it's pretty cool now. I have to say, like, tiles is one of the most fun features in the software we've ever had, because you can just get in and you can just experiment yourself, and like when you're hitting it great, what are your numbers? Just like your launch monitor. And then when you're not hitting it great, it's so easy to come back in and get feels for what you're doing when you're not playing well.
Yeah, that's right. And so he could do it slowly, what would have happened like to some other students when they pick up the speed, you're increasing the difficulty of the task. Can they keep it together? So that's another way to use this.
Trillium. So something to point out, and again, this plays into the transition sequence that I think you and I agree is a really important piece to the swing. Maybe the coach wants to pull up 2 columns of tiles, transition sequence on the left and peak speeds on the right, so that they can measure when they get the player in a better transition, how does it affect the speeds because they're putting more energy into the system.
Love it.
Right?
Love it.
That would be an example right there. So yeah, hey, your sequence is great, but when he bumped up the speeds,
it fell apart.
He got out of sequence there and he wasn't out of it before. And this is where you go, all right, do we really want to bump up the speed here and sacrifice the sequence? You as the coach make that decision, but now you're getting the data nearly in real time.
Exactly. So cool.
Cool. Thanks for that, Trillium. That's great. 3 more workflows to go through here. The next one I want to walk you through, we've actually already had up on the screen, but I want to show you how it works. So we're going to go back to 4 tiles. I'm going to go to tile templates, bring up swing characteristics like we had before, and I'm going to go to what's called postures iron. And all postures iron means is, does he start, he or she start in good posture? I think what you'll find is the way this works is, none. If you see none up there, it probably means they're starting in what you would determine to be a pretty good-looking posture on video, the way we built in the ranges. If you see minor, they're just outside the range from a standard deviation side. If you see major, they're probably not looking great on your video camera face on down the line from a setup side. So we've got S posture, C posture loaded. It'll tag you to one of those. And then the bottom 2, reverse spine, flat shoulders. So what we'll have Connor do, and actually you can see we've already hit a shot. We can actually just start with this one, which is kind of interesting. We'll go off the last shot that we just captured. So he's got a little bit of S posture. So he's got that lower back slightly arched. And let's just say in your coaching, maybe it's important, maybe it's not. Let's just say we wanted to maybe get him out of that a little bit. He could maybe feel something different with his pelvis. You could cue him on. But Connor's definitely the swing characteristic we wanted to focus on the most was his flat shoulders. He definitely has a tendency at the top to lose what we would call upper body side bend, or in a 2D world, we would just say he definitely loses his posture. You'd see that head rising up in his backswing. So on this one, we'll see if posture changes, if it does great. But his main cue here is he's just going to feel his lead shoulder stay a little lower in his backswing. And I'm sure you all have a million drills for this. We could use biofeedback or cue, but he's just going to feel his lead shoulder stay a little lower as he swings back. All right, we'll just hit another shot, and we'll see if we can just move it in a direction. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely felt the difference.
Okay, so we moved to minor. So S posture was still there, but you can see we actually moved the flat shoulders to minor. So let's hit another one.
So am I going to feel now just this left shoulder even coming down a little bit more?
Just exaggerate it even a little more. You could even be, just. So once again, you can build your own ranges, and we're just giving you a couple examples today how this works. But the nice thing about characteristics, for any of you that use 3D that say, boy, it's too complicated, I think you can find here that how many players do you have right now that are losing their posture in their backswing, hitting it on the bottom of the club face, or they're losing a lot of speed because they're wobbling. Now they actually have something that's telling them every shot if they did it or not. You have this paired with your launch monitor. You can see the ball flew better, but they also moved more efficiently. So swing characteristics are definitely pretty cool. We just showed you a couple of them today. Hopefully this gives you a good idea of what those can do for you. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Joe. Joe wants to take us through a couple of his scenarios that he likes to use from a workflow side. And Joe, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so again, just to reiterate, we're going to talk a little bit now about matchups and one important matchup for controlling your ball flight, and then connecting field versus real. So to start, Tony, if you can pull up rotation for the pelvis and the upper body at impact, and then the wrist angle. So flexion, extension, and deviation, just to round out those 4 tiles.
Yep.
And Connor, let's get started by just talking about what is flexion extension, so everybody's on the same page. So coming up to the camera and just have your arm out there flat for us.
Okay.
Great. Tony, can you bring up live numbers there? Great, thank you. So we have flexion extension live numbers up on the right-hand side. You can see Connor's got a flat left wrist right now, so we're seeing 0 degrees. No flexion, no extension, just 0 degrees. If he flexes his wrist downward, okay, or bows it, however you want to call it, the numbers will go positive. If he extends his wrist or cups it, you'll see the numbers go negative. Okay, so that's flexion extension of the lead wrist. So why is this important? Well, flexion extension of the lead wrist drastically control the club face, right? But that not only that, it has to match what you're doing with your body. Best players in the world are matching their bodies to their wrists better than anybody else, okay? It's not that they're doing the same thing, though. So let's talk about two polar opposite examples. So we've got Dustin Johnson, right? We all know he's really, really bowed at the top. But what does he do to compensate for that or to make that work? Well, he gets more open than just about anybody else on tour with his body at impact to neutralize that out. Because when you bow your lead wrist like that much, and you try and maintain that coming into impact, it's going to de-loft the club, and it's also going to get that face pointing a little bit more to the right, so he's got to open up his body more to get that start direction to where he wants it. Vice versa, we've got a guy like Luke Donald, who might even be an extension at the top, and he's probably near flat at impact, but maybe even a little bit of extension, definitely less than DJ. His body's going to be a lot more square to the target line than somebody like DJ because that is what matches what he's doing with his wrist. So we're going to talk about that now with Connor. I'm going to have Connor hit a shot, and just like Tony said, we're going to baseline him, and we're going to see where his rotation is as well as his wrists. Great, so let's take a look at what pops up there on our tiles over on the left-hand side. Terrific. So Connor had 33 degrees of torso rotation. I'm going to focus mostly on that torso rotation number and the flexion extension. So 33 degrees is right in the realm of what we're looking for. But the wrists are -10, okay? So this is where, as a coach, you could decide what doesn't match. What don't you like based on the ball flight that you're seeing? And then focusing on that one thing, like Trillium had said, be very specific about your goal and what you're trying to do. So I like where Connor's upper body is. I might want to change a little bit about where his lead wrist is, right? So I would tell Connor what I really want to have happen is get that face a little bit more de-lofted, right? So flex the lead wrist a little bit more than he did in that last swing. So Connor, what would that mean to you from a feel perspective as a player?
So I'm, with you saying that, I'm going to feel like it's almost like I'm going to be trying to knock down the ball or even hitting more, trapping it more down on it to feel that, that flexed or cupped feeling.
Great. So this is where, as a coach, you could decide what the change is that you want to make. And then you could even ask the player, what is the feel that they're trying to see if that they match, right? So we're talking about matchups, see if they match. So go ahead and try and hit that knockdown shot, Connor, and let's see if that does anything to your lead wrist flexion.
Can I pause you before you hit one, Connor?
Sure.
Just because I'm asking a question too. So would you set up, Connor, because I'm trying to find out what your setup numbers look like.
Sure.
And Joe, because you've used these wrist angles a lot, what do you see as like a pretty, like, I don't mean a strong grip, but a decently strong grip? Like what are you used to seeing range wise?
Yeah, right where he is about. So like your high 20s, maybe even your lower 30s. The stronger the grip, the higher those numbers, the extension numbers you'll probably see at address, right? So the weaker the grip, you'll probably see a little bit lower. But 20s to 30s, right, is kind of where we'd expect to see that player.
Yeah, and I just updated that bottom tile just to address her question. This is one of the things that's pretty cool. There's the data from the last shot. He's got -30 degrees of extension at address, and he had on that last shot -10 degrees at impact. So he actually went, right? He went into flexion, more towards flexion 20 degrees from his address position to his impact position. So he didn't get to flexion. That's what Joe's working on. But if you were looking at the data, he went more towards flexion 20 degrees from address to impact.
Right. So,
So-
like, go ahead, Trillium. Yep.
Sorry, I'm just sort of being an observer, but when obviously you're going to hit different shots, especially those sort of finesse shots, those finesse wedges. I mean, forget it. Like, I feel like the wrists is going to be everything, or they're going to be all over the place. Do you see a kind of a guideline in terms of driver though? Like, I mean, or is it just all personal sort of?
Well, so definitely as you get from the driver, right, which you're simply trying to maximize your power, to a finesse shot where you're really trying to control what you do, you're going to see different ends of the spectrum. Now, it's going to depend on the player, right? So grip is going to play a large part in this, where the starting position is and where you're getting them to. So it's hard to say if you're looking for an exact number with driver, but I would tell you with the driver, if they're starting out in extension, which is typical, right? A little bit stronger grip is a little bit more extension. When we get up to the top, we're going to want to take a look at what that number is. And then we're going to either want to, like for a Dustin Johnson, try and maybe maintain that number and get a little bit more active with the body to make it work. Or for a player like Luke Donald, who has a little less activity with his body, we're probably going to be a little bit more active with the arms and the wrists down at the bottom, which we definitely see in those two players' style, right? So again, it all comes down to matching them up.
Right. Thanks.
No problem. So yeah, Connor, let's just take a look if we can hit that lower shot, right? We're going to do that by on your way down in the downswing, just trying to get maybe a little bit more flexion in that lead wrist. And again, as a coach, you could evaluate this, right? Is it effective or is it not effective by what your launch monitor numbers are saying and what the ball's doing, right? So what we're trying to do with Connor, I'd say that was really successful. So right around the same number for address position with extension, negative 28.8. So no big change there. Body, now 29 degrees. So again, he was 33. It's right around the same, very negligible difference. But the wrist flexion now went from negative 10 to positive 3.5, essentially. So we achieved the goal that we were trying to achieve on this swing. I'd say at this point, if you're working with a player, they're renting this. They don't own it yet, right? So that's where the longer-term reps and using the tiles will come into play to make this motion a bit more permanent for them in their game.
Yeah, Joe, one thing that's just, sorry to interject, one thing that's kind of interesting there is at address, he was 33, I believe, before, negative 33, and now he's 28. So just interesting from the player side, without even telling him anything, did he almost go into a little bit more flexion at address, knowing he was trying to get there at impact? It's pretty cool to see those numbers change.
Yep, again, that's just a pattern, right? So again, I don't know if it was him doing it unconsciously or it's something that he's done in the past, but by weakening that grip a little bit at address might have given him the opportunity to feel a little bit more flexion on the way down, right? So if he didn't do that, maybe we would see a ball that would come off a little bit too far to the left for Connor, right? So that's where we can decide what direction we want to go with him. So with that being said, I'm going to segue over now to feel versus real, because again, in golf, what's more important than connecting feel versus real to get the player to perform at a high level? So one of the things Connor could do, or you could do with your players, is have him rehearse the feel that you're trying to impart by looking at the live numbers on the right-hand side. So Connor, go ahead and go up to the top of your swing.
You want me to stop at the top?
Yeah, go ahead and stop at the top, and then start to work your way down and feel a little bit more flexion. And by the time you get to impact, let's try and get it to around 0, right? So, or maybe even a little bit positive. It's okay, and Trillium, please chime in on this by all means. It's okay to overdo it, to give them a feel, because you probably have to do that to make even a small change, and you could always work the player back to the middle rather than go little by little and do it that way. Trillium, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, for sure, because you know, you have to be able to identify when you're doing it incorrectly or correctly. And oftentimes, if it's comfortable, it means we're doing it the same way we've always done. And so you might have to go extreme in a certain way to feel, wow, that's okay. Now I feel it. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is, I like the image of an airplane, right? So if the airplane wings are out, but you're tilted, right, and you need to get back to neutral, you're going to crank the steering wheel in the opposite direction just to get you back to neutral. So the same thing kind of applies. You have to really over crank, and then we're going to kind of drift back to our comfort, back to center at some point anyway.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So that's how you can connect feel versus real. So Connor can go ahead and do that a few times, get the feeling of what he's trying to do at impact, or at least into his downswing. And then when he's ready, hit a shot, and we can see what really happened right there on the left-hand side without ever having to leave this screen. So that is unbelievably powerful as a coaching tool.
So, okay, I'm going to jump in again. Slow motion, yes. I've heard someone call these Tai Chi swings, and I kind of like that idea. It's very slow motion. But then don't jump to 100% speed. Go incrementally faster and faster, because the force parameters that you're putting on it, you're not going to be able to feel that in real slow motion. You're going to have to practice the feeling of the force, and the forces are it's going to be something in and of itself to feel. So anyway, so 10% speed, 50% speed, 75% speed, then go to your full.
And with doing that, Trillium, that's where you could probably see, just like on the one where we did the transition sequence and the peak speeds, where does it go bad, right? At what level of speed? And then you can get that player to live there for a little while they're working on it, which will, again, eliminate maybe some frustrations with having to take it to the golf course. Yeah, cool.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Trillium. So I think at this point, we'd like to wrap that portion of today's webinar and open it up for Q&A. We've got a lot of really good questions here. If you can, I'd recommend sticking around for this. We're going to dive a little bit more into the software, look at some of the questions that have just come in. So we'll take questions for about 15 minutes. It's 4:43 local time right now. Take about 15 minutes of questions. If we don't get to your question, there's quite a few. We'll follow up with you after the event, and we'll make sure to get back to you. So the first question that we'll take is, in your flat shoulders example, what percentages determine what's minor or major? And I'll tell you, one of the best ways to do this is actually to pull up the numbers live while you have the swing characteristic on the screen. So I'll give you an example. So let's go back here. I'm just going to bring up the body again on the soft touch extension. We'll pull up tile templates, swing characteristics for 6-iron. And once again, this is the posture ones, same ones we pulled up prior. Now let's just say we're focused on flat shoulders, and we can see below on that last swing Connor had, he was minor. Well, what's the metric we're looking at with flat shoulders at the top? Once you know that, you can really figure out what these ranges are. So you hold that for just a second. So with flat shoulders at the top, I know most of you know this, but just to be very clear, we're basically looking at upper body side. So from a 2D perspective facing the camera, it's going to look like this. At the top of the backswing, it's going to look more like this, right? So there's a plane that, like most people that load back into their backswing with an iron, they're going to have somewhere between 30 and 40 degrees of upper body side bend. If you start seeing less than 30, you're going to definitely start seeing these shoulders go more level to the ground. So if you say, well, what's triggering it? One of the things that we can actually do is let's just update one of these tiles to that number so we can see it in real time. So let's go, keep flat shoulders, but we'll go torso transition. One thing we didn't mention on this webinar that's a really important point for those of you that stuck around, one of the places you've always had to go in the graph to get to the max backswing numbers in our software, you always had to go to the graphs, because top, the definition of top was where the club changed direction. So the pelvis is already gone, hopefully. The torso is already gone. You could never really get to the max values unless you went over to the graphs. Once again, more clicks. Now we can actually go to where the torso transitions. So if I want to see max pelvis numbers, I just go to pelvis transition. If I want to see max torso numbers, I go to torso transition. So that's actually where we're pulling the flat shoulders from. I want to know the moment in time the torso stops and changes direction, what's the orientation of the torso in the side bend plane at that moment in time. So I'm going to click on torso transition, torso side bend, and there's his number, right? So he's minor right now with minus 34. So let's have him make another swing. And let's have him feel like that left shoulder staying a little bit lower now. He'll exaggerate it. Not that he's working on this, but you can kind of see, you can see how this is triggered. So pretty darn good contact there. We'll see the number update now, and we'll also see that bottom one update. So now he went to 42 degrees. So on that last swing, now you can pull up your video and say, hey, look at your shoulder plane, but we now know very quickly that he gained 6 degrees of left side bend with that torso change direction, and we got rid of the swing characteristics. So the question was, how do you know what the ranges are? And I would just say the best way to learn this is actually to bring up the numbers that correspond with a characteristic, get in and play with it, and you'll really learn the numbers relatively quickly. Anything to add, Joe, Trillium, on that? From a learning side, Trillium, anything to add?
No, I just think isolating is really good. Like, it's overwhelming to try to memorize numbers and ranges, I think. But if you sit here and if you get really good at one range, you start paying attention every single time. And the same thing with launch monitor. You know, you start to really look at angle of attacks, and you say, wow, they're totally different ranges depending on the club and depending on the way the person is at the top. So.
Yeah, great. Okay, next question. Is there a goal or range for each person, for each of these positions in the summary report? We didn't go through the summary report today. The goal of this was tiles, but there is in our summary reports, just so everybody knows, you can update the ranges. We know that everybody moves differently, right? And you may come into some of these swing characteristics and say, well, my player physically can't do that. Everything in the software is customizable, so you can work with that player in front of you. So like in our swing summary, you can actually edit the ranges. So if Mr. Jones comes in and he's 68 years old and he's had back surgery and he can only turn 60 degrees, you can change the range. So if he goes 60 degrees, it's going to turn green, and he doesn't have to move like a 28-year-old tour player. So great question. You can definitely customize it anywhere in the software. One question, can I pull up just one tile? Good question. We've definitely got that a few times. Right now it's either 4, 8, or 12. It just makes it super simple in the software. As this gets out into the market the last couple weeks in future, if one tile is really important, just keep letting us know. I think we do a pretty good job of listening to our customers, and if that's constant feedback, we will make the change. Good question, thank you. And I'm going to let somebody else take this one so I can turn it over. When measuring wrist angles, must the arm sensor be lower on the arm near the wrist sensor? Joe, do you want to, Joe or Trillium, want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the answer is yes. So to measure wrist angles, 2 things need to happen. Number 1, your software needs to be in golf lead wrist mode. Okay, not golf mode. So golf lead wrist. And then you're going to take the sensor. There you go, golf lead wrist. Thank you, Tony. And then the sensor configuration is going to be exactly what you see here with Connor. So no upper arm, nothing above the elbow. It's going to be right above the wrist joint. And then you have the hand sensor. Okay, so that's the configuration. So you want to get those 2 sensors as close together as possible without them interfering with one another. So Connor, go the other way again like you did before. Extend your wrist back. So you'll see when Connor extends his wrist, those sensors don't butt up against one another, but they also are very close to one another starting out, right, on his body. That's how you're going to want the sensor configuration in the software for capturing lead wrist angles.
Great, thanks, Joe. Question for Trillium. Trillium, does the brain magnify feelings? Example, does a small change feel like a bigger change than it really is?
You know, I can't answer that like on a neurological level. I don't know the answer to that, but I know just from inductive reasoning and from experience that I'll take a video of somebody who's making a monumental change. Like, okay, I'm going to do a crazy version of whatever we're doing. And then you look at it and it's like, ooh, it almost looks the same. So I think, you know, the answer from a practical application standpoint is yes, small changes feel huge.
Yep, makes sense. Thank you. Question here. is there any option to get audible real-time feedback for practicing a movement? The goal of this wasn't to go into biofeedback today, but I think while we're on this flat shoulders one, we can show you how quick it is to get to the biofeedback, and we can talk quickly just about a nice workflow there as well. So I'm going to go home. We were in measure mode before. This is where you get to your tiles, and we're going to go to train. And I'm simply going to load what we're looking at. We were looking at side bend at top. So this is just like iTunes. I can just load my favorite song. In this case, it's a drill, side bend at top, and we'll launch it. So literally within a couple of clicks now, I can take the hips off the screen. Connor can come in. There's Connor's range. We can change the view of the animation. And now as Connor swings back, go ahead. When he gets into that range there, that's literally his left side bend in the none range. So if Connor swings back and he goes into his older pattern where he loses his posture, we can see now he's outside the range. What's the number? We simply click on numbers and we can see he's below 30 degrees, right? When he gets his left shoulder a little lower, he gets the tone. We can now see he's closer to that 40. Once again, everybody's going to be a little bit different based on their flexibility, their mobility, their swing style. But that's how quick you can really get from, tiles. This is where you can use tiles to assess if you know what you're working on. Like, if you're just getting the K-Coach system and you're like, where do you start? It's like, well, what have you been working on with that player for the last 6 months? Like, this is where Trillium mentioned, he really likes the fact that you can focus, right? You can really focus on one thing. So if you've got a player that loses their posture, go to tiles and evaluate it. Have them hit a few shots. What are the numbers? Then go over to biofeedback, give them the feel. But then you got to take the biofeedback away. They can't play with the biofeedback on the golf course, so they're going to go back into their subconscious patterns. And as they do that, tiles become the way to be able to show progress. What happens when I take the tone away? Do they go back to their old pattern? Well, maybe it's like Trillium said. Maybe they're at 28, but when I'm training them, they're at 40. But when I get them a little bit more in performance mode, like, hey, $10, you can't get inside that circle on the red flag, maybe they go to 34. But that's a huge improvement, and we're moving them in the right direction. So tiles, biofeedback tiles becomes a really simple workflow that focuses on just a couple numbers. No numbers in the case of biofeedback if you want to get them off the screen. It doesn't get simpler than that. And then back to tiles to measure, remeasure, and or show progress. Anything to add there, Joe, Trillium?
No, that was great.
I'd agree 100%.
Good. Joe, what are some more of your matchups that you like to look at?
Great question. There's a lot of them. So I'll talk about, one or two more, right? So with that being said, if any of you have noticed, there's some videos that have been uploaded to our certified page, so there's going to be more of those. So if matchups are something you want to know more about or see, definitely let me know, and I'll put out more videos on that. But another one, let's talk about attack angle, right? So if we're going to try and control the attack angle of the golf club. So that's going to take into account lower body side bend and upper body side bend at impact, right? So very simply, that's your baseline matchup for how are you going to control the attack angle, and then you can add that to side bend and rotation to really control the attack angle and maybe the swing direction, right? So that would be another one where the first one we talked about today, we're controlling club face, start direction of the golf ball, so face to path ratio really is what we were talking about. If we're talking about side bends at impact, now we're really getting into that up and down movement of the club head and controlling the attack angle. So that would be another example of one.
Great. Thank you.
No problem.
Good question. Did the numbers that you use for the major minor patterns come from data collection on tour or with peers? Good question. We actually have two databases. One for pro with our partnership with TPI, where we have the PGA and LPGA senior tour ranges. But more recently, we've actually got the peer data that's based on two main components. It's based on age and it's based on sex. So once I mentioned earlier, you got somebody that's older that's coming in that doesn't rotate as well. In the old software world, they'd swing, you'd show them they're red, they look at the report, they're like, oh, I'm getting older, I can't rotate enough. Well, now it's like, no, we're actually bringing you up. If you're 65 years old, we're going to compare you to somebody that's I'm not sure exactly what the age is, 60 to 70. But there's about 8-year brackets, 8-year dispersion in between age groups. So it's much more relative based on age and based on sex. So depending on where you are in the software, it can either be based on pro or it can be based on peer. Our new evaluation report that just came out a couple months ago, that's the one that's primarily based on peer, based on age group. Good question. Joe, you want to take this one? 3 movements are rotation, bend, and side bend. However, when adding thoracic extension in someone's swing, will this come up as a reverse pivot?
So just to make sure I got the question correct, so when talking about thoracic extension, is that going to trigger reverse spine angle? If that's the question, the answer is yes. So with our swing characteristics. So once a player goes past 0, okay, so we're talking about bend now, right? So whether they're not going into as much extension and they're just leaning this way, or they're actually going into more extension of that thoracic spine, if it goes past 0 at the top there or at its max number, it will trigger the reverse spine angle swing characteristic.
Yeah, and I would say that was really important too with the amount of rotation that somebody has too, because if you've got a player that gets more than 90 degrees of rotation, so just very simply as Joe said, this is bend. So when you calibrate, bend is 0, basically coming right out of the sternum. As you bend forward, you're going to get into about 40 degrees of upper body bend. But remember, the more somebody rotates, the more this club's going to come closer to the horizon. So if you've got somebody and they only have 70 degrees of rotation, but you're seeing extension, they've probably got too much extension in their golf swing. There's definitely something going on in the core, the glutes, definitely down in this area that they don't have good control of. But if you get a player that's got, maybe a hypermobile, female that can rotate 100 degrees, the more turn you have, you may actually start to see this go closer to 0. So once again, with tiles, that can be pretty cool. And that's where you go to your torso transition, you pull up rotation. You go to torso transition, you pull up upper body bend. And now you can really correlate, well, are they getting into extension because they're rotating more, or are they actually just getting into extension because they're losing their plane of motion in that bend plane? Hope that helps. Let's see, 4:58, we'll do 2 more questions here. There's a lot of questions. So if we didn't get to use yours, I apologize. I'm skipping around just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to take this one. How often are you using drills to manage kinematic sequence and enhance that motion? And what methods have you seen be very beneficial to get the proper sequence out of players who come over the top? I'll let both of you, whoever wants to take that one, jump in. Drill?
So the first part of the question is how often do I do it? Probably all the time. At least once a day. I teach on average probably 6 a day, sometimes a lot more, sometimes a little less. So yes. And what drills do I use? It depends on where the person is originally. If they don't get a sense of like, okay, I just did it today. Just explaining to the guy what he was doing kind of did it on its own. He got really fast. He needs to pause at the top to gather up. So I like the idea of letting yourself have a moment so then you can kind of refocus where your energy is going to go in the downswing. Pelvis. So this guy tended to go zink with the arms. So if he had a little pause, that worked. But there are other people that have never thrown a ball, or they grew up before Title IX and they were never encouraged to do anything rotary. And so sometimes in that case, they need, I have students that need a lot more guidance with the process. And so one thing I do love is taking your hands, get into a threshold of a door. So you're sort of standing in the doorway here. Bring the arms back, hold on to the door, and feel as though your chest is back. So the chest is back, but now can you tune into the feeling of the pelvis? Can you feel the legs working? Can you feel some kind of separation? You can feel that. That's good. I have a handful more, but this is one of my favorite things to do because I think it just fixes so many issues.
Yeah, thanks, Trillium. Joe?
Yeah, I think, so I know there's 2 parts to that. My first part would mirror Trillium. I'm not coaching as much as Trillium right now. I only have a select few players, but I definitely coached full-time for a very long time. So using it all the time. I mean, at my academy in Thailand, we had 6K players and a K coach. So we heavily use 3D. In terms of what drills would you do, again, there's hundreds, if not more, than you could choose from. I'll tell you, I would just, instead of going into the drills because there's just too many, I would say try and identify what the issue is with the player. Is it a physical issue, which is definitely going to be the hardest to change? Do you want to go down the corrective route, or do you want to coach around it? Is it a motor pattern issue? Have they been doing the same thing for 30 years? That might take a little longer, more biofeedback. Or is it just a concept issue? Did they read, Golf Magazine last weekend and now they're trying something new? That's going to be a little bit easier. So try and place them in one of those 3 buckets, and then once you do that, I think it'll be a little bit easier to focus in on a certain area and apply a drill.
Cool. Thanks. Great. And last question here. How long, this is from obviously a new user here, somebody looking to use the system. How long will it take me to get up to speed with this? Am I going to have to use it with my friends as guinea pigs? And Joe, I'll let you just chime in on this one as well. Joe's our Director of Customer Success, just so everybody knows. So he runs the ed department. I would just say we've been around now for, I think we're going on our 16th year. And I think Trillium could allude to this as well. Every year our goal is to make this simpler and simpler. Every version of software that comes out is getting more reliable, getting easier to use. And from a training side, we have everything in place that, the minute you get the product, there's somebody on your computer that's logging in, they're pairing your sensors, they're installing the software. Once that's done, they're going to walk you through the basics of how to measure, how to calibrate, how to just capture your first swing. Then the next thing becomes, all right, I know how to use the technology. Got it. I can put the sensors on very quickly, less than a minute. I know how to calibrate. One button click, they're calibrated. Then they just capture swings. That's pretty easy. Well, now I've got this data. What do I do with it? I think that's where I could transition over to Joe and just say, we've built programs to make sure that you really understand how to use the 3D data. And the way that this is built now, the most important thing is we learn what you're working on with your player, and then how do you get to those metrics very quickly. So you don't have to learn everything. It's just how do you get the data, and then, I'm working on Mr. Smith. We've been working on he gets set up to the left a lot, and he's always doing this with his hands at the bottom, and we're just trying to square up alignment. Well, why don't you just start off using the system for biofeedback for alignment, and you could use it tomorrow, and then you can really progress with it over time. So I'll let Joe take that, but I would just say it's never been easier to get going, and we have all the resources in place that I can confidently look at you, and I know Joe can as well, and say if you get the system, if you put the effort in, you're going to be successful in using it.
Yeah, I would reiterate, Tony, I'm going on almost a decade now using 3D. Been a customer of the company for a while before coming on board. So when I first got my product, I'll speak from my personal experience. I didn't use it on anybody other than myself and close friends for probably 60 days or more. I really got good with it. Now, that learning curve has been drastically cut down based on the things that we've done over the years to make it easier, like Tony had said. But I would stress and recommend only using it with your students in the areas that you're comfortable, even if it's only one area, right? If it's just tiles, maybe you only are comfortable with 1-2 biofeedback activities. Just use them, test the other stuff on your own, get comfortable with it, and then put it into the game per se, right? So, don't put things into the game when it's with a student in front of you if you're not ready, because it's just going to exaggerate the chances that it could go wrong. So just build on that, use what you're comfortable with so that your student feels really good about using the technology, and then slowly start to add more and more things. And then, the resources that we're providing you from a company perspective is just going to accelerate that learning curve.
Good. Thanks, Joe. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time. I'd especially like to thank Trillium and Joe for joining us today. I appreciate you all staying on. I know the Masters Par 3 tournament is on. I wasn't going to mention that prior just to lose your attention, but hope you enjoy that. Enjoy Masters Week, and thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.